In the grey haze of 1920s London, where fog curled through narrow alleys and the air carried the bite of coal smoke, a modest house on the edge of Whitechapel opened its doors, its sign reading "The Children's House," in neat, hopeful letters that promised warmth to the city's lost and forgotten. Miss Eleanor Crane, a woman with soft eyes and a gentle smile, stood at the threshold, her hands folded, as she welcomed shivering orphans with a voice as soothing as a lullaby, offering bowls of thin soup and clean blankets to children who knew only the cold of the streets. To the neighbors, she was a saint, her grey hair pinned neatly, her dresses plain but tidy, her kindness a beacon in a city that often turned its back on the weak. Shopkeepers nodded as she passed, her basket filled with bread and apples for her charges, and mothers whispered gratitude for the woman who took in those no one else wanted. The house itself was quiet, its windows glowing softly at night, its brick walls damp from the endless drizzle that cloaked London in a mournful shroud. But beneath the warmth, something stirred, faint and unsettling, like a shadow moving against the grain of the light. At night, when the fog thickened and the city hushed, strange sounds drifted from the house. Soft whimpers, not quite cries, that could be mistaken for the wind rattling loose panes or cats prowling the alleys. Eleanor moved through her days with a calm that seemed unshakable, her smile never fading as she tucked children into narrow beds, her fingers lingering just a moment too long on their thin shoulders. She spoke of love, of saving souls, but her eyes held a stillness, a depth that seemed to see beyond the children, beyond the walls, to a purpose only she knew. The neighbors noticed small things, a faint, sour smell that clung to the air near the house, a window on the upper floor that stayed shuttered even in daylight, but they pushed these thoughts aside, blaming the damp or the city's grime. Eleanor's routine was flawless, her mornings spent teaching the children hymns, her evenings spent reading them stories of angels and redemption, her voice steady, but carrying a weight that made the younger ones flinch without knowing why. The children, some as young as 4, others nearing 12, followed her rules, their eyes wide with trust that hadn't yet learned to doubt. But in the quiet of the night, when Eleanor climbed the stairs with a lantern in hand, the house seemed to hold its breath, its walls absorbing sounds that didn't belong. Soft scratches, muffled gasps, the creak of a door that led to rooms no visitor ever saw. London carried on, its fog swallowing the house in a grey embrace, but the echoes of something wrong were growing, faint but persistent, like a dream that lingered too long after waking. The fog of 1920s London clung to the cobblestones of Whitechapel, wrapping the children's house in a grey veil that muffled the clatter of carts and the shouts of street vendors, making the world feel distant, as if the house existed in its own quiet realm. Miss Eleanor Crane moved through her days with a grace that seemed to soothe the chaos of the city, her soft hands guiding the 22 children under her care to their beds each night, her voice low and warm as she whispered good nights, her fingers brushing their foreheads with a tenderness that made the younger ones lean into her touch. To the neighbors, she was a figure of quiet mercy, her grey hair neatly pinned, her apron spotless as she carried baskets of bread and milk through the streets, her smile a promise of care for the orphans who had nowhere else to go. The house ran like a well-kept clock, its lower rooms filled with the soft clink of spoons at breakfast, the murmur of children reciting hymns, the rustle of Eleanor's skirts as she swept the floors. But beneath this order, small rules began to tighten. invisible threads pulling at the children's hearts, doors locked after dusk, windows latched even in the stuffy heat, a rule that no child could leave the table until every plate was clean, no matter how their stomachs churned. Eleanor's eyes, always watching, seemed to catch every misstep, her gentle corrections laced with a weight that made the children shrink, though they couldn't say why. At night, she walked the hallways, her lantern casting long shadows that danced on the walls, her footsteps slow and deliberate, pausing outside each door as if listening for something only she could hear. The neighbors saw only her kindness, the way she handed out apples to street urchins or knelt to tie a child's shoe. But they didn't notice the faint tremor in her hands when she locked the front gate, or the way her smile faltered when a passerby lingered too long near the house. The children felt it, though, a growing sense that the walls were listening, that the rules were more than rules, each one a knot tightening around their small lives. A boy named Tommy, barely 8, whispered to his bunkmate about a strange sound he heard from the attic, like a soft scraping, but Eleanor's voice cut through the dark, telling him to hush, her tone soft but sharp enough to silence him. Her mind was a hidden machine, turning her outward warmth into a mask for something colder, something that saw the children not as souls to save, but as pieces in a game only she understood. The city moved on, its fog swallowing the house's secrets, but the whispers in the hallways grew, faint but persistent, like a heartbeat buried in the walls, waiting for someone to notice before it was too late. The children's house in Whitechapel stood like a silent sentinel, its brick walls soaked with the damp of London's endless fog, the air inside heavy with the scent of boiled cabbage and wax from candles that burned too low. The 22 children, their ages spanning from 4 to 12, moved through their days in a rhythm that felt like a trap closing slowly. Their laughter, once bright in the first days, now fading into hushed murmurs as they sensed the house itself was watching, its walls seeming to lean in when they passed. Miss Eleanor Crane, the headmistress, maintained her gentle facade, her hands guiding the children through lessons in arithmetic or sewing, her voice soft as she corrected their mistakes, but her eyes held a cold focus, like a hunter studying prey. That night, she walked the upper halls, singing old hymns about angels and mercy, her voice drifting through the house like a cold wind, its notes carrying a chill that made the children pull their thin blankets tighter, their hearts pounding without knowing why. The rules had grown stricter. No speaking after lights out, no looking out the windows, no touching the locked door at the end of the hall, and each rule felt like a weight pressing down, stealing the air from their small lungs. Tommy, the 8-year-old who once whispered of attic sounds, now sat silent at meals, his eyes fixed on his plate, afraid to meet Eleanor's gaze, afraid of the way her smile seemed to know his thoughts. Her mind was a labyrinth of calculated calm, seeing the children as vessels for a purpose she kept hidden, a purpose she believed was guided by whispers from beyond, voices she heard in the quiet of her own thoughts, telling her to mold their fear into something sacred. The children felt trapped, not by chains, but by the house's oppressive stillness, by the mirrors in the hallways that reflected their faces but seemed to show something else, shadows that didn't match their own, eyes that looked too old, too tired. One girl, Lily, barely 10, caught her reflection and froze, swearing she saw it move before she did. But when she told another child, Eleanor's voice cut through, telling her to hush, that mirrors only show truth, her tone soft but sharp enough to make Lily's hands tremble. The other children began to avoid each other's eyes, their once shared giggles replaced by silence, as if speaking might draw Eleanor's attention, her hymns now a nightly reminder of the house's grip. Outside, Whitechapel's fog rolled on, muffling the clatter of the streets. But a delivery boy lingered one morning, his ear catching a faint sob from an upper window, quickly swallowed by Eleanor's sudden appearance at the gate, her smile warm but her eyes warning him to move on. The house's walls held their secrets tight, but the children's fading faces, reflected in those cruel mirrors, whispered of a darkness growing deeper, a trap closing tighter with each passing night. The children's house in Whitechapel stood like a silent sentinel, its brick walls soaked with the damp of London's endless fog. The air inside heavy with the scent of boiled cabbage and wax from candles that burned too low. The 22 children, their ages spanning from 4 to 12, moved through their days in a rhythm that felt like a trap closing slowly. Their laughter, once bright in the first days, now fading into hushed murmurs as they sensed the house itself was watching, its walls seeming to lean in when they passed. Miss Eleanor Crane, the headmistress, maintained her gentle facade, her hands guiding the children through lessons in arithmetic or sewing, her voice soft as she corrected their mistakes, but her eyes held a cold focus. Like a hunter studying prey. At night she walked the upper halls, singing old hymns about angels and mercy, her voice drifting through the house like a cold wind, its notes carrying a chill that made the children pull their thin blankets tighter, their hearts pounding without knowing why. The rules had grown stricter. No speaking after lights out, no looking out the windows, no touching the locked door at the end of the hall, and each rule felt like a weight pressing down, stealing the air from their small lungs. Tommy, the 8-year-old who once whispered of attic sounds, now sat silent at meals, his eyes fixed on his plate. Afraid to meet Eleanor's gaze, afraid of the way her smile seemed to know his thoughts. Her mind was a labyrinth of calculated calm, seeing the children as vessels for a purpose she kept hidden, a purpose she believed was guided by whispers from beyond, voices she heard in the quiet of her own thoughts, telling her to mold their fear into something sacred. The children felt trapped, not by chains, but by the house's oppressive stillness, by the mirrors in the hallways that reflected their faces but seemed to show something else, shadows that didn't match their own, eyes that looked too old, too tired. One girl, Lily, barely 10, caught her reflection and froze, swearing she saw it move before she did. But when she told another child, Eleanor's voice cut through, telling her to hush, that mirrors only show truth, her tone soft but sharp enough to make Lily's hands tremble. The other children began to avoid each other's eyes, their once shared giggles replaced by silence, as if speaking might draw Eleanor's attention, her hymns now a nightly reminder of the house's grip. Outside, Whitechapel's fog rolled on, muffling the clatter of the streets, but a delivery boy lingered one morning, his ear catching a faint sob from an upper window. Quickly swallowed by Eleanor's sudden appearance at the gate, her smile warm, but her eyes warning him to move on. The house's walls held their secrets tight, but the children's fading faces, reflected in those cruel mirrors, whispered of a darkness growing deeper, a trap closing tighter with each passing night. The children's house in Whitechapel stood cloaked in fog, its walls damp and heavy with secrets that seemed to seep into the very air, where the scent of mildew mixed with something sharper, like the dust of old bones ground fine. Miss Eleanor Crane, with her soft gray hair and gentle smile, moved through the day as a beacon of care, her hands guiding the 22 children through lessons and chores. But at night, when the house fell silent and the candles burned low, she climbed the narrow stairs to a locked room above, her steps slow and deliberate, her lantern casting shadows that writhed like living things. In that room, hidden from the world, she knelt on the creaking floorboards, her fingers tracing intricate patterns with chalk made from charred remains she kept in a tin box, each mark a twisted symbol she believed connected her to forces beyond the living, forces that whispered to her in the quiet of her mind, demanding offerings only she could give. The children, once eager for her bedtime stories, now dreaded the moments she called them one by one to join her, her voice soft but unyielding as she told them to close their eyes and listen, her words weaving tales of ancient spirits who needed their fear to stay silent. Her rituals were slow, deliberate, turning innocent games into something sinister. She would hand a child a small, smooth stone, warmed by her own hands, and instruct them to hold it against their chest until their heartbeat matched its weight, the pressure building until their breaths came in shallow gasps. Her calm gaze fixed on their trembling forms as she murmured that their pain was a gift to the unseen. Sometimes she wrapped their fingers in thin threads, pulling them tight until the skin turned pale, telling them the threads were lifelines to the spirits, their discomfort a sacred knot in a cosmic tapestry only she understood. The children's bonds, once strong in their shared fear, began to crack like thin glass under the weight of these nights, their trust eroded as they saw each other's eyes dart away, afraid to share the terror that grew in the quiet moments alone with Eleanor. Tommy, the boy who once spoke of attic sounds, now flinched when his name was called, his small body tense as he followed her upstairs, knowing the chalk marks waited, knowing her gentle touch would turn sharp in ways that left no visible scars but cut deep into his mind. Eleanor's mind was a locked vault, her thoughts a maze where cruelty was recast as devotion, where each child's trembling was a note in a hymn she sang to forces she believed guided her. Oh, downstairs, the house ran smoothly, the other children eating their meals in silence, their laughter long gone, while outside, a neighbor paused by the gate, her ear catching a faint hum from the upper windows. Not quite a song, but something heavier, something that made her hurry away. The fog thickened around the house, swallowing the sounds of Eleanor's rituals, but the children's fear was a living thing, growing in the dark, waiting for the moment it could no longer be contained. The children's house in Whitechapel stood shrouded in the fog of 1920s London, its walls damp with secrets that seemed to cling to the air like the smell of ash and stale bread, while downstairs the clatter of plates and the murmur of children's voices painted a picture of normalcy that hid the truth above. Tommy, an 8-year-old with eyes too old for his small frame, sat in the attic's dim light, his knees pulled tight to his chest, clinging to a fading memory of running through a crowded market, his mother's hand warm in his, her laugh, a sound that felt like sunlight before the world turned cold. That memory was slipping now, dissolving like smoke in the heavy air of the locked room where he and the other 21 children were kept, their days governed by Miss Eleanor Crane's rules, their nights haunted by her presence. Downstairs, the house ran like a well-oiled machine, Eleanor serving thin soup to the children at long tables, her smile soft as she praised their neat handwriting or tidy beds, her voice a gentle hum that masked the chill of her hymns, drifting up from the lower halls at night. But in the attic, where the children were taken one by one for Eleanor's rituals, the air was thick with dread, the chalk marks on the floor glowing faintly under her lantern, each line a silent command that twisted their minds. Tommy held on to his memory of the market, whispering it to himself like a prayer, but it blurred with each night Eleanor called his name, her hands guiding him to kneel before her symbols, her voice telling him his pain was a gift to the spirits she served, her fingers pressing a warm stone against his chest until his heart raced and his breath caught. Her mind was a dark engine, turning kindness into a mask for her belief that the children's fear was a sacred offering, a way to appease the unseen forces she heard in her dreams, forces that demanded suffering to keep the world from breaking. The other children felt it too, their eyes avoiding Tommy's as they sensed his quiet rebellion, his refusal to let go of the past. But fear kept them silent, their bonds fraying as they turned inward, each alone in their terror. Downstairs, Eleanor's laughter mingled with the clink of spoons, her sons, 2 boys she treated as her own, come playing marbles in the parlor, unaware of the attic's horrors, while she swept the floor with steady hands, her eyes flicking upward when a faint sob broke through, quickly dismissed as the wind. Outside, a neighbor paused by the house, her ear catching a strange hum from the upper windows, her heart uneasy, but her feet carrying her away. Tommy's memories were fading, the market's colors turning gray, his mother's face lost in the shadows of the attic's walls, and with them went the last spark of hope. Replaced by a fear that seemed to breathe in every corner, waiting for the next night's ritual to tighten its grip. The children's house in Whitechapel stood wrapped in a fog that seemed to choke the life from London's streets, its walls heavy with the damp of secrets that grew thicker each night, the air inside stale with the scent of wax and fear. Miss Eleanor Crane moved through the house with a quiet grace, her hands steady as she tucked the 22 children into their beds, her voice soft as she whispered good nights. But in the attic, where the locked door hid her true work, her touch turned sharp, her gentleness a lie that cut deeper than any blade. The children, their small bodies pressed against the cold floorboards of the attic room, learned to dread the sound of her footsteps on the stairs, each creak a warning of the rituals that waited in the dark. Eleanor's mind was a locked chamber, her thoughts a twisted hymn to forces she believed demanded pain, her rituals a careful dance of cruelty masked as care. She would take a child's hand, her fingers soft at first, then press a thin wire, warmed by her lantern, against their wrist, not to break skin, but to linger until their pulse raced, their breaths shallow. Her voice murmuring that their fear was a song to the spirits, a necessary offering to keep the world from unraveling. Sometimes she used a soft cloth. Soaked in a bitter mixture she brewed herself, wrapping it around a child's throat just tight enough to make breathing a struggle, her eyes blank but focused as she counted their gasps, telling them their effort pleased the unseen watchers she served. The children's bonds, once a fragile thread of shared whispers, began to fray under this silent hurt, their eyes avoiding each other as fear turned them inward, each child a solitary island in the attic's gloom. Tommy, the boy who clung to memories of a sunlit market, felt his heart shrink as he watched Lily, the girl who'd seen shadows in the mirror, flinch from him when he reached for her hand. Her trust broken by Eleanor's whispered lies that they were all weak, all unworthy. Eleanor's rituals grew more precise, her hands steady as she arranged the children in patterns that matched her chalk-drawn symbols, her mind convinced that each tremor, each stifled sob, was a step toward a balance only she could see. Downstairs, the house ran smoothly, the clatter of breakfast dishes and the laughter of Eleanor's 2 adopted sons masking the truth above. Though her hands paused when a faint cry slipped through the floor, her face blank as she hummed to drown it out. Outside, a neighbor lingered by the gate, her ear catching a strange rhythm from the house, like a heartbeat too slow to be natural, but she shook her head and moved on, unwilling to name the dread that clung to her. The attic's darkness grew heavier, the children's spirits bending under Eleanor's silent hurt, their hope fading like a candle starved of air as the house's secrets tightened their grip, waiting for the moment they could no longer be contained. The children's house in Whitechapel loomed under a sky thick with fog, its walls echoing with sounds that blended into the city's distant hum. But one afternoon a clergyman named Reverend Hale arrived at the door, his knock firm as Eleanor opened it with her usual soft smile, her hands folded as she invited him in for tea, her voice warm as she spoke of her work with the orphans. The Reverend sat in the parlor, his eyes scanning the neat room, but something tugged at him, a faint, acrid smell that lingered like spoiled milk mixed with rust, not strong but persistent. Refusing to fade even as Eleanor poured the tea and chatted about the children's lessons, he shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the ceiling when a soft thump came from above, dismissed by Eleanor as the children playing, though her eyes held a flicker of something sharp, something that made him pause. Upstairs in the attic, Eleanor's tests had grown bolder, her rituals evolving into deeper invasions of the mind, using everyday items to carve lasting wounds into the children's souls. She would take a simple comb, its teeth fine and innocent, and run it slowly through a child's hair, whispering that each strand pulled was a sin released. But she twisted it, pressing the comb's edge against their scalp until it dug in, not drawing blood but holding it there for hours, forcing them to recite her hymns while the pressure built, their minds fracturing under the relentless ache, her voice calm as she explained that this was communion with the spirits, their pain a bridge to the beyond. Other times, she used a pocket watch, its tick steady, dangling it before their eyes, making them follow its swing while she counted backward, her tone soft but commanding, until their eyelids grew heavy. Then she snapped it shut, startling them awake only to repeat over and over, planting seeds of dread that bloomed into nightmares where time itself trapped them. Her mind was a serene void, her logic a dark sacrament where cruelty was redemption, each child's whimper a confirmation that the unseen forces she worshipped were pleased, her belief unshaken that their suffering balanced a cosmic debt. Tommy watched from his corner as Lily endured a ritual with a handkerchief, Eleanor folding it over her mouth, not to suffocate, but to muffle her breaths, making her inhale her own fear until her eyes watered, her small body shaking as Eleanor murmured that her tears were holy water. Hope flickered among the children, a whisper of the Reverend's visit spreading like a spark, imagining his questions might pierce the house's veil, but it dimmed as hours passed, and no rescue came, their trust in each other crumbling further under the weight of Eleanor's gaze. Downstairs, the Reverend rose to leave, mentioning the odd smell again, but Eleanor only smiled, blaming the fog, her hands steady as she saw him out. Her adopted sons played quietly in the hall, unaware of the attic's torment, while Eleanor's mind turned back upstairs, plotting the next test. The fog, outside, thickened, carrying the Reverend's unease with him as he walked away. But the echoes in the house lingered, growing louder in the silence, a harbinger of the horrors that refused to fade. The fog over Whitechapel seemed to lift the day the truth about the children's house broke free, as if the city itself exhaled in horror when a neighbor's persistent unease led a constable to force open the attic door, revealing the 22 children, their frail bodies hunched in a locked room, their eyes wide with a fear that spoke louder than words. Miss Eleanor Crane stood silent as she was taken away, her gentle smile gone, her hands steady, but her face blank. as if the spirits she claimed to serve had abandoned her. The city reeled, its people stunned that the woman who handed out bread to the poor, who sang hymns to her orphans, had hidden a darkness so deep it seemed to stain the very walls of the house. The children, freed from their attic prison, were carried into the gray light, their bodies trembling, their minds scarred by Eleanor's rituals, combs pressed into scalps, stones held against chests, threads tightening around small wrists, each act a mark that would never fade. Eleanor's notebooks, found tucked beneath a floorboard, spilled her twisted thoughts in neat, looping handwriting. Pages filled with talk of spirits and cosmic debts, her belief that the children's pain was a sacred offering to keep the world from breaking, each word a window into a mind where cruelty was devotion. London changed in the wake of the horror. New laws demanded inspections of orphanages, neighbors were urged to report strange sounds, a collective shame settling over the city for letting such evil grow under their noses. By the Thames, a small stone marker was raised, etched with 22 lines, one for each child, a quiet place where people left flowers and whispered apologies to names they'd never know. The children, sent to new homes, carried their wounds, some speaking in broken whispers, others silent, their eyes haunted by the attic's shadows. Eleanor's adopted sons, unaware of her acts, were left to grapple with a mother they thought they knew, their laughter silenced forever. The city's people gathered at the marker, their heads bowed, asking how they missed the signs, the sour smell, the muffled cries, the shuttered windows, blinded by Eleanor's warm smile and gentle hymns. Her rituals, so quiet, so methodical, had slipped through the cracks of daily life, a reminder that evil could wear the face of kindness, could hide in plain sight. The house stood empty now, its walls holding the echoes of pain, a testament to a truth that had shattered Whitechapel's heart. The rain fell gently, washing over the marker, but the marks of Eleanor's evil lingered, a sad scar on history, whispering warnings to those who passed by, urging them to listen closer next time.